I woke up to a sterile white room, the faint smell of antiseptic in the air, and the buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. My body felt heavy as though I had been asleep for days. My head throbbed with dull pain, and I tried to shift in the bed, but found it impossible to move without the feeling of tight bandages constricting around me. Where was I? I blinked a few times, struggling to focus. My eyes darted to the sterile walls. Then I noticed the phone in my hand. It wasn't mine. The screen was cracked, the edges worn, and a small, unfamiliar logo popped up on the screen. A nurse appeared by my side, her expression calm, but there was something off about the way she looked at me, like she was waiting for something. "You're awake," she said, her voice almost gentle. "There's someone on the phone for you." I couldn't make sense of it. I was just recovering, right? Just a few hours ago, or was it days I tried to push the fog from my mind, but it refused to clear? The nurse smiled kindly and handed me the phone, her eyes flicking to the clock on the wall before excusing herself. I didn't even have time to ask questions. I didn't feel like I could. It was a call from my lawyer. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Sarah, I need you to sit down. Matt sold the house while you were in the hospital. He's already moved out. He's gone," and the words blurred for a moment. I think I heard him say something about Jessica. My best friend. My chest tightened. A cold knot of confusion and panic began to form in the pit of my stomach. I tried to process the words. I tried to understand what was happening, but it was as if the ground beneath me had crumbled away. Matt, my husband. How, why, and Jessica. How could they? I could barely breathe as I heard the lawyer continue talking. It felt like my body was betraying me too. The pain of what I was hearing too much to bear. "Sarah," the lawyer continued, "we need to act fast. I'm sending you everything now. But you need to know it's over." I wasn't even sure how I was supposed to feel. Betrayal, anger, shock. I felt all of them, and yet none at the same time. I looked down at my hands. No wedding ring. I glanced at the IV in my arm, and the tubes that seemed to keep me tethered to this nightmare. What was Matt thinking? What was Jessica thinking? I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to ground myself, but the words echoed in my mind. Matt sold our house. While I was here in the hospital, I thought I was dreaming. But this wasn't a dream. It was real. Too real. The phone clicked off in my hand, but I didn't move. I couldn't. I was trapped in my own body, suffocated by the weight of the betrayal. My mind screamed for answers, but they would never come. Not from Matt, not from Jessica. And so, as I lay there in that cold hospital bed, I realized my life had just shattered. In an instant, everything had changed. This wasn't the life I knew anymore. This was something else. Something that I had never imagined in my worst nightmares. Life before it all fell apart wasn't perfect, but it was good. In those days, I thought we had everything figured out. I remember the quiet mornings that started with the smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen, the sun creeping through the blinds just enough to warm the wooden floors. Matt and I had a routine: wake up early, share a quick breakfast, and then head off to our separate worlds. His office downtown, my freelance work at home. We were busy, but we always made time for each other in the evenings. That's the thing about a marriage, right? You think you know your partner. You think you can predict their every move, their every thought. We'd been together for almost a decade. I could tell you his favorite pizza topping, the way he laughed after a long day of work, the exact way he preferred, his shirts folded, little things that made him Matt. And then there was Jessica. My best friend. I had known her even longer than I had known Matt. We had a bond that seemed unbreakable. She was the sister. I never had the one I called when I needed to cry, when I needed advice, when I had something to celebrate. She was there at every family holiday, every birthday, every random Tuesday night when the world felt too big and too overwhelming. The three of us, Matt, Jessica, and I, were inseparable. Or at least that's how I thought it was. The perfect trio. We laughed together. We went on vacations together. We spent every weekend together. And I never imagined that any of it could change. Not in a million years. Matt had been so attentive. I remember the little things he'd do just to make my day easier. A note left on the bathroom mirror reminding me to take care of myself. He always had a fresh bottle of water by my side when I sat down to work. He made dinner on nights when I was too tired to cook. And those nights always ended with the same routine, sitting on the couch watching an old movie, his arm around my shoulders. We had plans, big ones, the kind you make when you're in love and you think you have forever. We talked about buying a house in the countryside one day, a house with a garden, a dog, a place we could grow old together. Then the hospital incident happened. That's when everything started to change. But before that, there was nothing that hinted at the storm that was coming. Sure, like every marriage, we had our disagreements. We'd argue about silly things, whose turn it was to take out the trash, or whether we should splurge on a vacation to the Caribbean. But I always thought that was part of it, part of a healthy relationship. A little tension here and there, but it never felt like anything was wrong. And Jessica, she was always there, offering advice, checking in, making sure I was okay. I think back to the day before, I was admitted to the hospital when everything was still so normal. I had no idea that my whole world was about to shift on its axis. I remember that morning, Matt kissed me goodbye before heading out to work. He promised me he'd be back before dinner, and I promised him I'd relax and not work too much that day. It was supposed to be one of those easy days. Me, a cup of coffee, a good book, and maybe a nap. But that afternoon I started feeling off. My head felt heavy, my body weak. I dismissed it at first, thinking it was just the stress of the week catching up with me. When I finally passed out from exhaustion and ended up in the hospital, it was supposed to be just a quick checkup. The doctors assured me it wasn't anything serious. But I was wrong. It wasn't just exhaustion. It was something far worse. And the entire time Matt wasn't there, I thought it was strange at first. But then I chalked it up to his work schedule, but in retrospect, I realize now he knew. He knew what was happening, and yet he didn't bother to be there. Not for me, not when I needed him most. And Jessica, well, she was the one who visited me in the hospital. She was there when I woke up from my fevered sleep, but she wasn't the only one who had been visiting. That's the moment the fog in my mind began to lift, and I started questioning things I never would have before. Why wasn't Matt here? I had no idea. Then that my whole life, everything I thought I knew was about to come crashing down. Everything had been perfectly ordinary right up until it wasn't. At first I didn't see it, or maybe I didn't want to. It's so easy to dismiss the small things when you're living in a bubble of comfort thinking everything's fine. But looking back now, I see all the little cracks in the surface, things I should have noticed sooner, but didn't. They were there subtle and insidious like shadows creeping in when I wasn't paying attention. The first sign, if I can even call it, that came when Matt started working longer hours. It wasn't a huge change, at least not at first. It wasn't like he'd suddenly started pulling all-nighters or disappearing for entire weekends, but there were days when he'd get home later than usual. A few minutes at first, then an hour or more. I thought he was just busy, that it was part of the stress from his new promotion. We all go through those phases, don't we? The work-life balance gets thrown out of whack, and suddenly you're catching up on missed sleep rather than spending time with your partner. But I should have known Matt wasn't the kind of guy to work overtime, unless there was a pressing deadline or a project that needed finishing. He was always upfront about those things. So, when he started coming home at odd hours without so much as a mention of why I should have asked more questions. And then there was his phone. He had always been the kind of guy who kept his phone face up. Notifications on, never bothered with locking it. I had never felt the need to snoop. Why would I? We trusted each other. But then I noticed something strange. Matt began taking his phone with him everywhere, even when he went to the bathroom. Little things like that, nothing earth-shattering, but enough to make me raise an eyebrow. I remember once when I asked him if I could use his phone to look something up. He hesitated before handing it to me. That's weird, I thought, but I didn't say anything. It wasn't enough to confront him outright. The subtle changes weren't just in Matt, they were in Jessica too. She had always been the one I leaned on for advice and comfort, but over time she started to pull away. It wasn't a dramatic distancing, not the kind where one day she just stops returning calls. No, this was more like a slow fade. She would cancel plans at the last minute. Or, when we did hang out, she seemed distracted. At first I just thought she was busy with her own life. She had recently started dating someone new, and it seemed like she was just preoccupied with that. But then I started noticing odd things when we were together. Like when I brought up something about Matt and she'd go quiet. Not in the way she used to, where she'd laugh it off or tease me about being the perfect couple. No, this was different. She'd change the subject quickly or give me this weird, tight smile. I chalked it up to her being stressed to the new relationship occupying her mind. But even I couldn't ignore the little shifts in the dynamic between us. Jessica had always been my sounding board. If something was wrong in my relationship, she would have been the first to let me know, or at least offer her perspective. But now, she just didn't seem to care as much. Matt also stopped being as affectionate. I tried to brush it off as just part of life getting busy. We'd been married for years, and maybe we were just falling into the comfort zone where the need for constant affection fades a bit. But it wasn't just that. It was the absence of it. The quick pecks on the cheek instead of full kisses, the way he'd sit on the couch next to me, but not really be with me. And then there were the small arguments. They started to pile up one after the other like tiny pebbles in your shoe that eventually become unbearable. At first they were about trivial things: who left the dishes in the sink, who forgot to call the plumber. But as the weeks went on, those little squabbles began to feel less like harmless disagreements and more like something else. Every time we argued, it felt like there was an underlying tension, like we were both frustrated with something unsaid, something unaddressed. But we never talked about it. Instead, we let it fester. We pushed it down thinking that we'd get to it eventually, that it would resolve itself in time. But it never did. And then one day everything came crashing down in a way I wasn't prepared for. Looking back now, I can see it all so clearly how I ignored the red flags, because I didn't want to believe that something was wrong. I didn't want to believe that Matt, the man I had built my life with, could be slipping away, or that Jessica, the best friend I thought I knew better than anyone, might be keeping secrets from me. But the signs were there. They had always been there. I just wasn't ready to face them. It was a Tuesday morning when everything changed. A day that started like any other, but one that would mark the end of everything. I thought I knew about my life. The betrayal had been creeping up on me like a storm on the horizon, subtle and gradual, but I had no idea how fierce it would be once it hit. I was at home recovering from a routine medical procedure. It had been a tough week, and I was still feeling weak, but I had planned on spending the morning catching up on things. The house was quiet, too quiet. Matt was supposed to be at work, but the silence felt off, like something was missing. I hadn't heard the familiar sounds of him getting ready for the day, his usual hustle and bustle. It was almost like he was avoiding me. That's when I noticed it, the thing that would set everything in motion. It wasn't anything dramatic at first, just a small detail, but it stuck with me. I was in the living room flipping through some papers on the coffee table when I saw it, an envelope sticking out of Matt's briefcase. It was partially open, the edge of a document visible inside. Curiosity mixed with a feeling I couldn't quite place urged me to take a closer look. I pulled the paper out, my heart racing as I unfolded it. The first thing I noticed was the bold block letters at the top, contract of sale. My stomach dropped. I couldn't understand why Matt would have something like that in his briefcase, but I pushed the thought aside, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe it was something to do with work, but the more I read, the clearer it became. The document outlined the sale of our house, signed and dated a week ago. My mind went blank. My fingers trembled as I skimmed the details. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. Matt had sold our home, the one we'd built together, without even telling me, without asking. Without a single word, I couldn't breathe. I was staring at the page, the reality of what I was holding, sinking in with every passing second. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. The room felt colder somehow, the walls closing in on me. The house that I had walked through every day for years, the place where we'd celebrated holidays and birthdays, laughed and cried, it was gone just like that. I didn't know what to do. I could feel the world spinning the floor underneath me, starting to feel unsteady. How could he do this? How could Matt, my husband, the man I had trusted with everything, betray me like this? But there was more. There was one name, one part of the document that I couldn't ignore. The name of the buyer, Jessica. I stared at it, blinking as if my eyes were deceiving me. But no, it was there in black and white. Jessica, my best friend, the one person I had shared everything with. The person who had always been there for me. She was the one buying our house. The pieces began to fall into place. The subtle signs, the distance between Matt and me, Jessica's strange behavior. It was all coming together in a way I hadn't dared to imagine, but the truth was undeniable. My mind raced with 1,000 questions. Had this been planned all along? Were they seeing each other? Had they been plotting this behind my back? I stumbled back into the chair, my mind a whirlpool of disbelief and anger. I couldn't grasp what was happening, couldn't reconcile the image of the man I had married and the betrayal staring me in the face. How long had this been going on? Had I been blind to it all? My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. The weight of the revelation was crushing me. But even then, in the midst of the chaos inside my head, there was one thing I knew for sure. I had to confront them. I had to know the truth, All of it. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed Matt's number. It rang 3 times before he picked up. "Hey babe, what's up?" His voice was too calm, too casual. I didn't waste any time with small talk. "Matt, what the hell is going on? Why did you sell our house without telling me?" There was a pause on the other end of the line too long, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind trying to come up with a response. When he spoke again, his voice was strained, like he was already trying to defend himself. "Look, I didn't want to upset you. Okay? I didn't think it was the right time to tell you. Things have been complicated. Complicated. I couldn't believe my ears. You sold our house, Matt, and you didn't even think to tell me." There was a long silence. I could hear him sigh heavily before he finally said, "It wasn't easy for me either, but we had to do it. There's no other way." "Do what?" My voice was rising now. The anger and hurt I had been holding in for so long finally breaking free. "What do you mean we had to do it?" "You sold our home and didn't even ask me. And now I find out you've been working with Jessica behind my back." The phone line went dead silent again. And when he finally spoke, his words were soft, almost apologetic. "I'm sorry, but it's done. I don't know how to explain it, but it's over, and this was the only way forward. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. It was over." What did that mean? What was he saying? I couldn't comprehend the weight of his words. And then it hit me, the full force of the betrayal. It wasn't just the house, it was everything. He was already done with me, already moving on, and I hadn't even known. I hung up the phone without saying another word. My head was spinning, my vision blurred with tears, but I couldn't cry. Not yet. I needed answers. I needed to know everything. What followed the discovery of Matt's betrayal was a whirlwind of emotions, but nothing compared to the battle that lay ahead. The house, the heart of our life together, was now out of my grasp. But it wasn't just the house that I had to fight for. It was everything I had built with Matt, everything I had trusted. What started as a personal betrayal quickly became a legal battle that would test every ounce of my strength and resolve. I felt utterly powerless. The legal jargon in the contract of sale seemed foreign to me, and the paperwork that flooded my inbox and mailbox only added to the confusion. I had no idea where to start. I didn't even know if I had a chance of winning or if there was any hope of getting back the life I had once known. But what I did know was this: I wasn't going to let him take everything from me without a fight. The first step was hiring an attorney. It wasn't something I'd ever envisioned myself doing, but as soon as I walked into the law office, the reality of my situation hit me. The attorney, Sarah, was a sharp, no-nonsense woman who didn't sugarcoat things. She listened intently as I told her the story, her eyes narrowing when I mentioned Matt's name and Jessica's involvement. "You're dealing with 2 people who likely think they can get away with this," Sarah said, folding her hands on the desk in front of her. "But they don't realize that this is a serious matter. You're entitled to your share of the property and we'll make sure you get what's rightfully yours." Hearing those words from someone who knew the law felt like a lifeline. At that moment, I realized I wasn't alone in this. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I realized how much I had underestimated the complexities of a legal battle. Matt's lawyer, a slick, well-dressed man named Richard, immediately began playing hardball. The first time we met in court, I felt like a fish out of water. Richard was smooth and calculated, his every word designed to make me doubt my position. He painted me as the unstable emotional wife who was simply angry about the sale of a house. It was like I wasn't even a person to him, just a case to win. I couldn't believe how easily he twisted the narrative, and even more shocking was how quickly Matt had turned into a stranger. His demeanor in court was cold, almost like he had no empathy for me at all. It was like the man I had married no longer existed, replaced by someone who saw the whole situation as nothing more than a financial transaction. Sarah, however, was a force to be reckoned with. She countered Richard's every move, bringing in evidence that challenged their claims. She dug into the details, uncovering things Matt and Jessica had hoped would remain buried. From financial records to the timing of the sale, Sarah knew how to turn the tables. And with each victory, however small, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this wasn't over. Maybe I could take back what was mine. But the longer the case dragged on, the more exhausting it became. I spent sleepless nights reviewing documents, sifting through emails, and preparing for the next round of court appearances. There were moments when I wanted to throw in the towel. It felt like the whole world was against me. Matt, Jessica. the overwhelming mountain of paperwork. But the thought of walking away, of letting them get away with this, was something I couldn't accept. In the midst of all this chaos, something unexpected happened. My friends who had been quiet and distant after the initial shock started to rally behind me. Jessica's betrayal had left ripples far beyond what I had imagined. People I hadn't heard from in years began reaching out, offering their support, both emotionally and financially. Some even gave me tips on handling the legal battle, suggesting lawyers and strategies that could make a difference. One of my old college friends, Rebecca, offered to lend me money for legal fees if I needed it. It was humbling, and it made me realize how many people cared about me. The kindness I received from unexpected places helped me keep going when I felt like I was fighting alone. Then came the deposition, the moment where the truth would be laid bare in front of everyone. I had to face Matt and Jessica together, in a room under oath, answering questions that I never thought I'd have to ask them. The room was tense, and I could feel the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me. As we took our seats, Richard, Matt's attorney, led the questioning, trying to paint me as the unreasonable party. But Sarah countered every lie, every half-truth with facts. And when it was my turn to speak, I felt the raw emotion well up in me. I told them everything: how I had trusted Matt with my life, how I had believed in our future together, how I never imagined I'd be sitting in this room fighting for something that should have been ours to share. But it wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about dignity. It was about reclaiming my power. I wasn't just some woman scorned. This was a fight for justice for everything that had been taken from me. And then in a moment that felt like everything was about to come crashing down, a breakthrough came. Sarah had uncovered a crucial detail. It was something small, something Matt and Jessica hadn't accounted for. The sale of the house had violated a clause in the mortgage agreement, something I hadn't noticed before, but Sarah did. With this new evidence, we had a strong case. I could see it in Matt's eyes, the shift, the realization that he might lose this battle. His confidence started to wane, and it was clear that the walls were closing in on him. For the first time in this whole ordeal, I felt a flicker of triumph. Maybe I was going to get what I deserved, but the battle was far from over. The next few weeks would be filled with more legal maneuvers, more paperwork, and more tense court appearances. But I was ready. I had the truth on my side, and I wasn't backing down. As the dust settled from the court battle, the reality of what I had been through began to sink in. The legal fight, the betrayal, the emotional roller coaster, everything had taken its toll on me, but there was a strange sense of relief that accompanied the resolution of it all. The legal victory, though hard won, was bittersweet. The house was rightfully returned to me, but nothing about this journey could bring back the years of trust and love I had lost in the process. In the weeks following the ruling, I found myself standing in front of the house now, in my name again, trying to reconcile with the version of myself that had been shattered. It felt like I was looking at a stranger's home. The place that had once been filled with laughter and love now felt cold, disconnected, and hollow. It wasn't just the walls that had changed. I had changed too. Matt's absence was more palpable than ever. He wasn't just physically gone. He had disappeared from my life in every sense. In his place, there was nothing but the lingering remnants of a person I had once thought I knew. Jessica, too, was nowhere to be found. I wasn't surprised by her silence. After all, she had always been the one to run when things got messy. I'd like to think I had once been a better friend to her than she ever was to me, but I wasn't interested in revisiting that relationship. Not anymore. The people who had once been closest to me were now the ones who had caused me the deepest pain. But I had learned the hard way. Some friendships aren't worth salvaging, especially when betrayal is at their core. The days that followed the legal victory were filled with a mix of emotions: relief, grief, anger, and the overwhelming feeling of exhaustion. I was no longer a wife or a victim of betrayal. I was something different. I had to become someone different. The person I was before the betrayal was gone, replaced by a version of myself who had survived the storm. But at a cost, I decided to sell the house. Holding on to it felt like clinging to the past, and I knew that the space no longer held the meaning it once did. The idea of starting fresh somewhere new, somewhere far away from the echoes of Matt and Jessica, was the only way forward. It wasn't about running away. It was about healing and finding peace in a new chapter of my life. I moved into a smaller apartment in a neighborhood that felt completely unfamiliar. It was quiet, peaceful, and filled with possibilities I hadn't allowed myself to consider until then. There was no pressure to keep up with appearances or maintain a life I didn't want anymore. It was my space, my rules, and it was a place where I could breathe, where I could begin to heal. But healing didn't come easy. Even in the solitude of my new apartment, memories of Matt would creep in memories of the life we had planned. The scars of betrayal, though less visible, ran deep. There were days when I would find myself sitting in the middle of the living room, staring blankly at the walls, wondering how it had all gone so wrong. But little by little, the weight began to lift. I began to rebuild not just my life, but my sense of self. The journey to healing was a slow one, but it was mine to take. Therapy became a crucial part of that journey. I had initially resisted the idea of speaking to a professional, thinking that I could handle it on my own. But the moment I walked into my first session, I realized how much I needed to unravel everything in my mind. Talking to someone who wasn't emotionally involved allowed me to see the situation from a new perspective. It helped me understand that it wasn't my fault, that I wasn't to blame for what had happened. I also reconnected with people who had stood by me throughout the darkest moments, friends who never left, family members who offered unconditional support, and even coworkers who had noticed the change in me and reached out with kindness. They reminded me that I wasn't alone, that there was still love in my life. Slowly I started to trust again, not just others but myself. The hardest part, though, was forgiving myself. I had spent so much time blaming myself for not seeing the signs, for not trusting my instincts sooner. But forgiveness didn't come all at once. It took time. It took days when I would cry, weeks when I would feel the anger bubbling up again, and months when I would wonder if I would ever truly be okay. But little by little, I began to let go. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about excusing Matt or Jessica's actions. It was about releasing the hold their betrayal had over my life. The final step in my recovery came when I made peace with the past. I wasn't the same person I was. When Matt and I first met, I had changed, and that change was no longer something to mourn, but something to celebrate. I had found my strength, and in that I found my freedom. I no longer defined myself by what had been taken from me, but by what I had reclaimed. The day I signed the papers to sell the house was the day I finally felt like I was letting go. It was hard, no doubt, but in that moment, I knew it was the right choice. It was the final step in closing that chapter. I had learned the lesson I needed to learn, that I am enough, that I deserve better, and that I will never allow myself to be treated as anything less than what I am worthy of: love, respect, and honesty. I don't know where the future will take me, but I know that I am no longer afraid. I am stronger than I ever thought I could be, and whatever comes next, I'm ready. The betrayal may have taken something from me, but in the end, it gave me back the most important thing of all: myself. It was strange at first, the quietness of my new life, the absence of chaos. I remember feeling almost guilty at the peace that began to fill my days. For so long I had been living in a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and legal battles that it felt unnatural to wake up and feel calm. But it was a calm. I had earned one that I had worked tirelessly for. As the months passed, I slowly started to find my footing again. The apartment that had once felt so foreign now felt like home. There was something beautiful about the simplicity of it. The small space forced me to strip away all the excess, the things I no longer needed. I started to spend my time doing things that made me feel good. I picked up old hobbies I had forgotten about: painting, reading, gardening, and found a sense of peace in these small, quiet moments. But it wasn't just the physical space that was changing. I was changing too. I had spent so much of my life worrying about everyone else, about keeping my marriage intact, about being the perfect wife, the perfect friend, that I had forgotten what it meant to focus on me. I had been so wrapped up in the people around me and their needs and desires that I had lost track of my own. But now, for the first time in a long time, I was learning what it meant to truly take care of myself. I started seeing a therapist regularly. I had resisted it at first, thinking it was a sign of weakness. But as I delved deeper into the sessions, I realized how important it was to have a safe space where I could untangle my emotions without fear of judgment. My therapist, Susan, helped me to understand that healing wasn't about getting over what had happened, but rather about accepting it. She helped me realize that I had spent too much time trying to control the narrative of my life, trying to make sense of a situation that had been completely out of my hands. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the loss, they were all real, but they didn't define me. Through therapy, I began to rebuild my self-worth. I had spent so many years doubting myself, wondering what I had done wrong, where I had gone wrong. But Susan taught me to focus on the one thing I could control: how I responded to what had happened. And slowly I started to see myself differently. I began to realize that I had not failed, that I was not broken. The scars of betrayal would always be a part of me, but they didn't define my value. There were still moments of doubt, moments when I wondered if I would ever be able to trust again. The fear of opening up to someone new haunted me. Would I ever allow myself to love again? Would I always be looking for the next betrayal? But I knew that I couldn't live my life in fear. I had already lost so much because I had let fear dictate my decisions. I couldn't let that continue to shape my future. One of the most important things I did for myself during this time was to reconnect with old friends. I had distanced myself from so many people during my marriage, believing that I needed to be entirely focused on my husband. But now, with the dust settled and the pain starting to fade, I realized how much I had neglected my own support system. I reached out to friends who had always been there for me, the ones who hadn't judged me for my decisions or my mistakes. They were the ones who reminded me that I wasn't alone, that I was still worthy of love and support. In the midst of all this healing, I met someone new. His name was Mark. He was kind, patient, and completely different from the man I had once called my husband. I wasn't looking for anything when we met. I had no intentions of dating or opening my heart to anyone. But Mark was gentle, understanding, and never rushed me. Our relationship grew slowly without the pressure of expectations. We became friends first, and from there, something more blossomed naturally. At first, I was terrified. How could I trust again? How could I let someone into my life when it had been shattered so completely before? But Mark didn't push. He gave me space, never rushed me, and simply allowed me to be myself. For the first time in a long time, I felt safe. And little by little, I allowed myself to open up. I had no illusions that everything would be perfect from here on out. Trust once broken is never fully restored overnight. But I had learned that healing isn't linear, and that every day was a new opportunity to rebuild. With Mark, I learned that love wasn't something that should be forced or rushed. It was something that grew naturally from a foundation of respect and understanding. As I continued to grow, both as an individual and within my new relationship, I found new goals to pursue. I decided to go back to school to finish the degree I had put on hold years ago. I also became more involved in charity work, something I had always been passionate about but had never prioritized. The more I gave to others, the more I gave to myself. It was like filling a well that had been empty for so long. Looking back, I realized that everything I had gone through, as painful as it had been necessary. It had shaped me into the person I was becoming. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the legal battles, they had all been the catalyst for change. They had forced me to confront parts of myself I had been avoiding, and in doing so, I had learned to embrace my strength. It wasn't an easy road, but it was mine, and with each passing day I moved further from the woman who had been betrayed and closer to the woman I was meant to be. The past would always be there, but it no longer held power over me. I had learned to let go, to forgive not just others, but myself. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited about the future.